I am so excited to share some news with you tonight that I think is going to be such a massive, massive game changer for a lot of parents who are struggling with issues like I was when I was a foster mom. So I wanted to come on live tonight and share my story with you. And hopefully, I can make a difference for some other moms and foster dads that might be struggling with some of the same issues. So, for some of you that know my story, you know that about 4.5 years ago, I unexpectedly fostered a beautiful little 6-year-old boy who changed my life. Um, I love that little boy as if he was my own, and taught me to love in a way that I never knew how to love before. So, definitely a life-changing moment for me. And I have to tell you that when I got him and fell in love with him, I thought maybe the purpose for me to be his foster mom was for me to have my own child, since I didn't ever have my own son or daughter. And what I've come to realize as time has passed is that he was brought into my life so that I could help not just him, but a whole lot of other kids. And that's part of what I'm here to talk to you about tonight. So, some of you who haven't dealt with the foster care system, man, wow, it is perhaps the most frustrating, incompetent. I'm trying to be polite and not use curse words that'll get my video banned. It was the most frustrating time of my professional career, because even with my legal training, even with my undergrad degree in psych, even with taking trauma classes at Arizona Children's and at Arizona Trauma, I could not manage to make the system work for my mom and I. We worked together. We disagreed on some things, but we never disagreed on trying to get him help. And she and I both struggled to get DCS and his counselors to do what was right by him. And so for those of you that don't know, whether it's your own child or whether it's a foster son or daughter, when you take them into a counselor, they have to assign a billing code to their diagnosis or they don't get paid. And so they didn't know what was wrong with my foster son. Before I ever even got him, they took him in for the first appointment when DCS took custody, and they put him on a drug. Mind you, the psychiatrist had never spent more than probably 20 minutes with him at that point in time. No medical history, none of his school records, really had almost no information. And they put him on a blood pressure medicine. And it was to calm his anxiety. And my foster son was half Black. And so when I got him, I said, you first of all, I studied the drug and it wasn't approved. It had never been tested in children. And number two, he was African American. And I knew that African Americans had a propensity to high blood pressure. And so I was like, you can't put a little 6-year-old baby on blood pressure medicine because it could change his whole system. And what if he needs that later when he's a grown man? You could be impacting him for the rest of his life. Well, but they didn't care. They needed to put him on a drug because they needed to get paid. And so they diagnosed him incorrectly with ADHD. And his mother and I both said, he's not hyperactive. He doesn't have ADHD. And even his teachers in kindergarten and first grade all agreed that he wasn't hyperactive. I personally have ADD, and I had obviously had a psych background, so I knew what the disorder was, and I knew he didn't have those symptoms. Now, I didn't know what he had, and that's the second part of the story. But my frustration was so profound because I couldn't get them, kept saying, you can't put these in his medical records. That's not what he has. I would bring them a checklist of ADHD and say, these are all of the things. You can give him a brain battery test. You can do a brain mapping. Can we do that? Nope, we can't do that. We can't spend any money, but we'll put him on a drug. And I was livid. And so this gorgeous, incredibly intelligent little boy was labeled incorrectly and prescribed drugs incorrectly. And so as I had him some longer, his mother and I would talk in the counseling sessions that we had together and wanted to try to find the right fit for him. Couldn't get his counselor, who was now seeing him sometimes once or twice a week for an hour, almost a year, and they still didn't know what was up with him. And so I was so frustrated. And I have to tell you that when you take in a high-risk child, or you have a child that has autism or ADHD or sensory processing disorder, which was ultimately his diagnosis, we went through a whole lot of issues, behavioral issues that were caused by his trauma. And I won't go into a lot of detail on what they were, but he was this brilliant, amazingly loving little boy who couldn't control his behaviors because of what was going on in his brain and the stimulation in his brain. And had been kicked out of school, and I would cringe when the phone would ring during the day because I didn't want him to get in trouble at school again. And I told you I loved this little boy like he was my own, and I would cry myself to sleep at night because I felt so helpless. Like, I could see how brilliant he was. I kept telling him, he's gifted. He's so smart. You've got to test him for gifted classes. And they would say, but the behaviors. And I couldn't get any help. The only people that ended up helping me were when I went and paid for my own training with Arizona Trauma and with Arizona Children's. And I tell you, if you have any child that has had any exposure, you need to learn about the ACEs study, ACES. It stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it can be parents that are arrested or do drugs, or in utero exposure, or it could just be parents that have a divorce and you're separated from your parents, right? There's 10 different ACEs factors. And the higher the ACEs score the child, the more trauma he has. And there's different ways to deal with children with trauma. But what we know is that children that have trauma, they develop changes in their brain. Their brain goes backwards into that fight or flight stage, and the frontal part of their brain that deals with reasoning and analytical skills and being able to make right and wrong choices, that part shuts down because their brain is on survival mode, right? And so there's a lot of studies now that are saying like kids with trauma may not actually be genetically with bipolar disorder or depression or oppositional defiant disorder, but that they instead actually may have trauma-induced behaviors that you can change with trauma-informed training and counseling. Well, of course, that's not what he was getting with DCS, despite how much his mother and I both tried to get him transferred to different clinics. They refused. And it was, like I said, the most incredibly frustrating process. But I think the hardest thing for me was the helplessness, because I could see what an amazing child this was. And I could see that the more that his behaviors impacted him, the more he was being labeled. And it wasn't fair. But I also didn't know how to help, and the people that should have didn't. And so, like I said, I did my own research and learned about these different disorders. But when I tell you, regularly, I cried myself to sleep. Or regularly, when the teacher would call, I would cry on my way to school before I picked him up. Regularly, when he would come apologize to me and be afraid to look me in the eye because he was so ashamed, he would put his little hands out in the I love you sign and as his way to apologize, right? And moments like that, they change you. And I'm here to tell you, if you are a mom or a dad that's struggling with a child with trauma, or a child with autism or sensory processing disorder, I have something that might help. And I believe that that's part of the reason that I had my foster son, is because I was supposed to deliver this message to other parents. So, I recently started with a company called a nutrigenomic company. And one of the things that just honestly made me cry, like I'm doing now, I always try to do these lives without crying, and I never, ever seem to make it through them when I talk about my foster son. But one of the things that has blown my mind is that, the geeky me, the lawyer in me, the one that does all the research, of course, I did tons and tons of research. And there's a bunch of clinical studies that relate autism and ADHD and sensory processing disorder and bipolar disorder and depression, all of these things that our kiddos can suffer with. It relates them to 3 big things: oxidative stress, inflammation in their brain, and defects in their mitochondria in their brain. And so oxidative stress, that, like, we all know that. That's why you take vitamin C to stay healthy, or vitamin selenium, or vitamin E. You want to get those things in your body to help combat that oxidative stress, right? And I don't want to get too sciencey on you here, but that doesn't work. And they've studied it and studied it, and they think it should work because you have inflammation in your brain. So if you could get enough antioxidants in your body, they think that might help, but it hasn't. But they've studied something just recently that is helping, and it's called NRF2 activation. And it's a long chemical word. We call it NRF2, like the football. So NRF2 and NRF1. And what NRF2 does is it turns on God's pharmacy. Think about how profound that is. So thousands of years ago, our bodies, we didn't have a Sprouts or a Walgreens or a CVS or a pharmacy we could go to get drugs. There wasn't DCS prescribing things. We had to be able to heal our own bodies. And God designed us that way. He put a pharmacy in our own bodies, and all we have to do to activate that pharmacy is be able to find a way to turn on our genes that control it. And this company I'm with controls it. So it's called NRF2 activation. And what it does is it goes in and it talks to your genes, and your genes go, oh man, we better activate those antioxidants. We better activate those anti-inflammatories. And then it's like a heat-seeking missile. And that heat-seeking missile goes to the places in your body where your body needs it to go. You don't have to guess. And so if you have inflammation in your brain, that heat-seeking missile is going to send anti-inflammatories to your brain, and it's going to turn down the genes that produce inflammation. And all of that is going to help lower the oxidative stress. And there's study after study after study about how that makes a difference for kids with autism and ADHD and sensory processing disorder. I've heard the parents crying just like I used to cry every night, praying for answers, talking about the difference this has made for their kids. You know, we have a pharmacist with her doctorate. She has a friend whose her daughter was autistic, 20 years old and nonverbal, still wearing helmets, sometimes having to be in straitjackets from harming herself. And she talks about the fact that they put her on a NRF2 and NRF1 activator, and she started getting better. Not because NRF1 or NRF2 activation treats, cures, or prevents or mitigates a disease. It doesn't do that. What it does is it turns on your body's own genes so God's pharmacy can take the best care of you. And that 20-year-old girl, one of the first things she said to her mom, wow, what a story. She said, I want popcorn. Imagine that was the phrase, one of the first things you heard your daughter say at 20 years old. Imagine that she could go back to school again and you could have your life back as a family. You could take vacations now for the first time in 20 years, because that's what happened to her after NRF2 activation and NRF1 activation. And we have stories of a doctor, a physician who was treating autistic kids, saw this child the same time every week for a year, 52 visits, and no progress. But they kept treating him because she had an amazing mom, and she knew that this doctor had results. And one day he comes in and it was like the light switch went on. And this doctor comes out and says to the mom, like, everything is different. What did you do? It's like a different child. It's like all of the sudden things are clicking for him. And the mom says, you know, I put him on an all herbal natural NRF2 activator and a NRF2 activated energy drink. And it's supposed to help with brain fog and brain health. And he said, well, whatever you're doing, don't stop. And he continued to see that progress for the whole next year, until finally this doctor, who didn't believe in this stuff originally, he saw too many results with too many kids. And so he's now a distributor, changing more lives for moms and kids like that. And the stories, you guys, they're endless. They're so endless. There's young moms with 2-year-olds that just have gotten diagnosed, and moms that have struggled for 20 years. And dads that talk about the rages that their sons had, and now they can play baseball with them because they don't throw temper tantrums on the field. The stories go on and on and on. I have friends that have used it. Their kids were failing last semester, not because they weren't smart, but because they couldn't control their behavior to show people how smart they were. And now they're nerve 2 activated and using Axio, and they're getting A's and B's. And so, like for me, you guys, it's all about the evidence. And I'm a skeptic, but I lived the battle trying to help a little kid that I felt completely helpless to help, that none of the drugs they tried, they put my foster son on an antipsychotic drug for schizophrenics. And I was like, I pounded my fist on the desk. He's not schizophrenic. He's not having any psychoses. What are you doing putting a little child on something like this? That's not what he has. It's never been tested. I would have loved to have this nerve 2 activator and this nerve 2 activated energy drink to help with brain fog, to help him. But maybe it wasn't here so that I could help him. Maybe it was here so that I could help you or your grandchildren or your kids or your neighbor's kids or the little boy in the classroom who doesn't have any friends because of his outburst, or the little boy who got held down in a 5-point restraint face down on a mat with 5 adults holding him down. Imagine what that's like for a little 6-year-old or 7-year-old. And, these kids, they know. My foster son used to bang his head and tell me, my brain shell. And so if you can help those kids, not with drugs, but with something that helps their body heal themselves, man, share this video with someone. It's been a game changer for a lot of parents and a lot of grandparents and a lot of kids. And it's giving them a shot at being the kids that they deserve to be, to optimize their own health. And, it's not just that. So, I wanted to tell you about 2 other things that are so important that I never knew when I had my foster son. So I want to share it with you. So omega-3s are so, 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 so important for kids with ADHD or sensory processing disorder, depression, mood disorders, any of that. Take your child to your pediatrician and have them pull the child's omega-3 levels. Because here's what the clinical studies are showing, that kids with autism, ADHD, and sensory processing disorder, and depression and mood disorders, that their levels of internal antioxidants are low, like we've been talking about. Their oxidative stress is high, but their omega-3 levels are super low. So what we know is that you should have at least like a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. And with kids with these 3 disorders, their omega-3 levels are super out of balance, more than most of us. So, I was at Mayo about 3 weeks ago talking to them about cancer, and one of the cancer doctors got up on stage and he said, listen, if you're going to do supplements, there's all sorts of supplements. I talked about a bunch of different things, and he said, but omega-3s, everybody needs to be on an omega-3 unless you're a walrus. Great quote, right? Unless you're a walrus, you do not get enough omega-3s in your diet. And so I knew that I and my dad and my brother and all of the people I love need to be taking an omega-3 supplement. But when I saw the clinical studies about these kiddos and their deficits, it's crazy. So most adults, we have like a 40% of omega-3s compared to our omega-6s. And like I said, we want to get that so our omega-3s are about 200%. But in kids with autism, that number is about 27% of omega-3s to omega-6s. And in ADHD, it's 17%. And so they're way out of balance. And so have your pediatrician pull the blood panel and run their omega-3 and their omega-6 levels and see what their ratio is. And then decide what you're going to put them on. And then make sure whatever omegas you give them, that they are DHA dominant. Because again, what they found with any of these kids with neuropsychiatric disorders is that DHA is the omega-3 that helps with our body's neurological system. It takes away inflammation, but EPA helps more with your cardiovascular system and inflammation. So if you have a child, and if you're an adult with ADD or ADHD, make sure your omega-3s are DHA dominant, that they have more DHA than EPA in them. Super, super important. Now, the other thing is We all know that probiotics are important for all of us, that most of us don't have the right levels of bacteria in our gut. And there's a thing called the gut-brain axis. And they're showing a big correlation between the health of your gut and the health of your brain. But here's one thing I want to caution you about. If you have a child with ADD, ADHD, autism, or on the spectrum, they found that a lot of the probiotics that most of us would take have bacteria in them that they already have too much of in their gut. So just like you're going to have your pediatrician pull their omega-3 levels, have them pull their bacteria levels so that you can make sure you give them the right probiotic, because a lot of these kids have too much lactobacillus, and that is in almost every single probiotic. So you may need a specific probiotic to help your kiddos, right? Super, super important. And look, it may not be ours. That's okay. My purpose in talking to you isn't to buy our probiotic. My purpose in talking to you is so that you don't cry yourself to sleep at night every night wishing you had something that would help your kids. And the lawyer in me, like, you guys, I needed evidence, right? So I read the clinical studies, I had the evidence, I read the testimonials, but we have a doctor, a neuropsychologist, who did some brain mapping where they check out what's going on in the brains of these kiddos, right? And you can do CT scans where they can detect the differences and actually even help you diagnose things like sensory processing disorder. If you can get them to a clinician that has expertise here in Phoenix, that's at Phoenix Children's Hospital. They work with Barrows. They have the expertise in it. There's a phenomenal clinic up at San Francisco that specializes in these disorders as well. But they need to be specialists that understand how to do it. So we have a gentleman that works with us who did brain mapping on some of his kids that he works with ADHD. And he shared one of them with us. It's a 14-year-old child with ADHD. And I'm going to post them in the comments when I get done with this live so you can see the difference. In the first one, you can see the areas of red in the brain mapping compared to the brain of what they call a typically developing child. And then he put him on Nerf 2, Nerf 1, and Axio, our energy drink, for 2 weeks, and then did another brain mapping. And he's probably in his 60s. And he said in his entire career, he's never seen such a profound change so quickly. He was blown away with the differences. He believed in the science before, but when he saw his own brain mapping showing before his eyes what was happening in these kids' brains, he was even more convinced. So that, in one of them, you see the red inflammatory areas. In another one, there's all sorts of lines. You can see the hyperactivity in this child's brain, right? Because there's all these lines in the brain mapping. And then 2 weeks later, there's only 1 or 2 lines. So, so, so important. And you guys, the other thing I have to share is, I stumble in these studies with kids with ADHD. You're putting them on Ritalin and some of these other drugs. There's studies that these drugs in long-term chronic use, that they cause oxidative stress, that they cause neurodegeneration. They damage the neurological system of these little kids. And then there's other studies that show that these kids, they're having such a profound impact on their dopamine receptors, their happy genes, right? Those are their neurons that make them happy later in life. So you could be controlling their behavior at 6 years old and ruining their happiness at 26 years old. So isn't it better to try something natural that doesn't take in a foreign substance, that helps their body heal itself? And I'm not saying to take them off their meds. I'm saying to work with their pediatricians and work with their counselors and see if you can get their oxidative stress levels lower. See if you can get their inflammatory markers lower. You can do tests as well on their oxidative stress in their body. I'll post down in the bottom the numbers. They're called CPT codes that you ask your pediatrician to run these tests to check their oxidative stress levels, to check their inflammatory markers. So you know where your kids start and you know where they go to. The stories, the studies, the brain mapping, the tears, the happy tears of moms. That's why I'm so happy. Like, I found my heart's place to make a difference for so many kids. And, I try so hard not to cry when I do these, when I talk about this, but when you go to bed at night and you're utterly helpless, when you don't know what to say or do to this little child that you love more than anything in the world, and it breaks your heart to see them being treated badly at school, to teachers hold them in restraints that you would hold a criminal in a prison in. They were taking a little child down like he was being arrested by a SWAT team. When you see a little child talk about wanting to kill themselves, when you hear those words come from an innocent baby, you want to do everything you can to help. And I'm so blessed to be with a company that's having difference for those kids. And so, share this video with anybody you know that has a child or a grandchild or a foster child that struggles with these issues, because it's making a difference for so many kids. So many kids. And I would love to be the one that lets a mom cry happy tears because they get a good report card, or because the teacher sends an email at the end of the week and says they got all stars, or they got all fives, that they helped me this week, that there was no outburst. Or to be the mom who doesn't have to worry that the phone call during the middle of the day is the teacher going to kicking their little baby out of school. Because those things matter. And I would love to be able to help so many other parents with that. So please share this with them. Talk to them about getting their kids on omegas. Talk to them about getting their kids on probiotics. Make sure that they test with their pediatrician and counselors. Go to a developmental psychologist. Many pediatricians don't have expertise in this area. Ask for a referral to a developmental psychologist so they can help do this testing, so they can evaluate the oxidative stress levels. This is their expertise. And make sure the drugs that they're giving your kids, that they've been tested on kids. And make sure you know the side effects, because I guarantee you most of them that were given to my foster son, they weren't tested on kids. But they were using him as a guinea pig so they could get paid. Let that sink in. The people that were supposed to be protecting him were using him as a guinea pig so they could get paid. So I will do a separate live about my many frustrations with the foster care system on another live. But for tonight, I'm going to sign off the way my foster son used to talk to me and tell me, by telling you, I love you to God and back. I pray that this message gets out to whatever friends, whatever family, whatever kids that you know and love that might need a little help. And even if the parents decide not to use it, I promise you, the fact that you reached out to them to see if you could help them will make a huge difference. Because the other thing that's hard as a mom is you feel alone and you feel like nobody understands. And the only other parents that understand are parents that have witnessed the same behaviors that you have and have cried themselves to sleep at night. So I know if you reach out to them, that they will appreciate that somebody took the time to care about how you could help their kiddos too. Share this with psychiatrist, share it with your pediatrician. If you want the clinical studies, reach out to me or whoever shared this with you, and we'll get you those clinical studies to share with the doctors. But give it a chance. Give your child a chance. Love you to God and back. Night, everybody.